Nathan Hayes almost kept walking. The alley smelled like old cardboard and wet metal. He had come out that way to avoid the lights and noise from the grocery store parking lot. Christmas music drifted through the walls from somewhere inside the building, thin and cheerful in a way that felt wrong for the cold. That was when he heard the rustling. Not rats. Too careful. He turned and saw a pair of small boots sticking out from inside the dumpster. One of them moved, slow, like whoever wore them was tired. Nathan stood there longer than he should have. He thought about leaving. People survived things all the time without him. Then the boots slipped, and a small body nearly fell forward into the trash bags. Before he could think it through, he stepped closer and said quietly, "Hey, kid, you okay in there?" The movement stopped. Two wide eyes appeared over the edge of the dumpster. They did not look surprised to see him. They looked resigned. And Nathan felt something inside his chest shift in a way he had not allowed in years. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The girl stayed half hidden inside the dumpster, fingers curled over the edge. They were red from the cold. Not shaking, just stiff. Nathan kept his voice low. "You stuck?" She shook her head once. Her hair was tangled and dark, falling into her face. There was a smear of something gray along one cheek. Trash dust, maybe. Her coat looked too thin for the weather. One sleeve had a tear near the wrist. She didn't climb out. Nathan realized she was waiting. Not for help. For him to leave. That part landed slowly. He rested his forearms on the metal edge of the dumpster and looked inside. A few grocery bags. Cardboard. A box of bruised oranges. The girl had one of them in her hand. Not eating it, just holding it. "You hungry?" he asked. Another small nod. He let out a breath that turned to fog in the cold air. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's start with getting you out of there." She hesitated. Then she pushed the orange into her coat pocket and climbed out. She was smaller than he expected. 7, maybe 8. Hard to tell. Kids carried themselves differently when they had learned not to ask for things. Her boots were mismatched. One had a purple stripe, the other was plain black. Nathan stepped back so she had space to jump down. When she landed, she steadied herself with one hand against the metal side of the dumpster. Her balance looked practiced, like falling was something she had learned to avoid. Up close, he could see her eyes better. Gray, older than the rest of her face. "What's your name?" he asked. She wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve before answering. "Melody." Her voice came out hoarse. Nathan nodded once. "I'm Nathan." She didn't react to the name, didn't seem to care who he was. Her eyes had already drifted back toward the dumpster. Nathan followed the look. "Still hungry," he said. She didn't answer. But she didn't deny it either. He gestured toward the side of the building. "There's a diner across the street. Warm food. You can sit inside." Melody's shoulders tightened almost immediately. "No." The word came fast. Too fast. Nathan noticed the way her eyes moved toward the parking lot, then toward the road, measuring distance like she was calculating how fast she could run. "Okay," he said calmly. He raised both hands a little. "No diner." Her shoulders loosened by a fraction. He leaned back against the dumpster and studied the alley for a moment. The snow along the edges had turned gray from foot traffic and car tires. "You got somewhere you're heading tonight?" he asked. Melody shook her head. The motion was small but certain. "Someone looking for you?" Another shake. Nathan felt the cold start creeping through his coat. He rubbed one hand across the back of his neck. Christmas Eve. He had meant to grab groceries and go home. Heat up the soup sitting in his fridge. Sit through the quiet of the evening the way he had done for the last 3 years. Now there was a child standing 10 feet away from him, pulling an orange out of her pocket like it might disappear if she didn't keep touching it. She tried to peel it. Her fingers struggled with the cold skin. Nathan stepped forward slowly. "Here," he said. She held still while he took the orange and broke the peel open with his thumb. The smell spread through the cold air, bright, clean. For a moment it didn't belong in the alley. He handed it back. Melody separated a slice and ate it quickly. Not greedy, just efficient. Nathan watched her chew. "You been out here long?" She shrugged. Not an answer. How about tonight? She looked toward the street again. Since dark. Nathan checked his watch. Almost 9. He did the quiet math in his head. Cold. Darkness. A kid alone behind a grocery store on Christmas Eve. The thought of leaving her there made something heavy settle behind his ribs. Melody, he said. She paused halfway through another slice. My house is about 10 minutes from here. Her eyes lifted toward him immediately. Suspicion, sharp and instant. Nathan expected that. You can warm up, he continued. Eat something real. Then we'll figure out where you're supposed to be. She watched him carefully. You call people, she said. It wasn't a question. Nathan understood what she meant. Police. Social workers. Strangers who asked too many questions. He took a moment before answering. Eventually, yeah. Probably. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Not relief. Just confirmation. She went back to eating the orange. Nathan didn't push. They stood in silence for a while. A car drove past the alley entrance. Headlights flashed briefly across the brick wall behind them. Melody flinched. Barely noticeable. But Nathan saw it. He spoke again. Softer. You don't have to decide anything right now. She kept eating. When the orange is gone, he added, we'll walk. If you don't like the house, you leave. Fair? Melody studied him, really studied him this time. Her eyes moved over his coat, his boots, his face, like she was comparing something she already knew. Finally, she nodded. Just once. Nathan pushed himself off the dumpster. All right. They started toward the alley entrance. Melody walked a few steps behind him. Not close. But not running away either. Snow crunched under their feet as they crossed the parking lot. The grocery store windows glowed with warm light. Inside, people moved between aisles with carts full of holiday food. Through the glass, Nathan caught sight of a decorated tree near the entrance. Red ribbons. White lights. Melody slowed down when she saw it. Her gaze stayed on the lights longer than anything else she had looked at so far. Nathan didn't comment. After a few seconds, she kept walking. They reached his truck. Nathan opened the passenger door. Melody climbed in without being asked. The seat swallowed her small frame. Nathan started the engine and turned the heater on. Warm air began pushing through the vents. Melody placed both hands in front of it immediately. Nathan watched her from the corner of his eye. She didn't look at him, just sat there quietly, letting the heat touch her fingers. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Nathan felt a strange tension settle into his chest. Not panic. Something quieter. A sense that the night had already changed direction, and he had stepped into it before understanding where it led. He drove through the quiet streets. Christmas lights glowed from houses along the road. Some yards had inflatable snowmen. Plastic reindeer. Melody watched everything through the window, but she never asked questions. Nathan didn't ask many either. After a few minutes, he said, "You like soup?" She nodded. "Good," he said. "That's about the only thing I know how to cook well." A tiny pause passed. Then Melody said something so quiet Nathan almost missed it. "My grandma made soup." Nathan's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. He didn't ask the question that rose immediately. Instead, he said, "What kind?" Melody thought about it. "The one with little noodles." Nathan nodded slowly. "Chicken noodle," he said. She looked out the window again. "Yeah." The truck turned onto a street. Nathan's house sat halfway down the block. Small. Quiet. One porch light glowing against the snow. When he parked in the driveway, Melody didn't move right away. She studied the house the same way she had studied him earlier. Careful. Measuring. Nathan shut off the engine. "You ready?" Melody looked at the door, then at the dark windows. Finally, she nodded. Nathan stepped out and walked around to open her side. Cold air rushed in again. Melody slid down from the seat. They walked to the porch together. Nathan unlocked the door. The house smelled faintly like cedar and old books. He flipped on the hallway light. Melody stepped inside slowly. Her eyes moved across the room. The couch. The small kitchen table. The coat hanging near the door. Then her gaze stopped. on the picture frame above the fireplace. Nathan noticed it immediately. He had forgotten it was still there. A photo of a woman standing beside him, her hand resting gently over the curve of her stomach. Both of them smiling. Melody stared at the picture for several seconds. Then she looked back at Nathan. She didn't ask anything, but the silence between them shifted again. Nathan cleared his throat and gestured toward the kitchen. "Come on," he said. "Let's get that soup started." Nathan moved through the kitchen with a kind of quiet familiarity that came from years of living alone. Lights on. Pot from the cabinet. Soup from the fridge. Nothing fancy, just something he had made 2 nights earlier because cooking for one usually meant leftovers. Behind him, Melody stood near the doorway, not wandering, not touching anything, just watching. Nathan filled the pot and set it on the stove. The flame clicked to life beneath it. "You can sit," he said, nodding toward the small table. She didn't sit right away. Her eyes were still moving around the room, mapping it in pieces. The refrigerator, the back door, the hallway leading deeper into the house. Nathan noticed. Kids learned those things when they had to. After a moment, she pulled out the chair closest to the wall and climbed onto it. Her boots hung a few inches above the floor. The orange was gone. Only the peels sat in her coat pocket now. Nathan rinsed his hands in the sink. "You want water or milk?" Melody thought about it like it was a real decision. Water. He poured a glass and placed it in front of her. She drank half of it immediately. The heater in the house hummed softly as warm air moved through the vents. Outside, wind brushed lightly against the siding. Nathan leaned against the counter while the soup warmed. He didn't want to start asking questions too quickly, but silence had its own weight. "You said your grandma makes soup," he said carefully. "Made," Melody corrected. Nathan felt the words settle in the room. "Made," he repeated. She stared at the table while she spoke. "She got sick." The sentence ended there. No explanation followed. Nathan didn't press. The soup began to steam. He grabbed the bowl and poured some in, letting it cool for a minute before setting it in front of her. Melody stared at it. Then she picked up the spoon. The first bite disappeared almost instantly. The second one slowed down. By the third, she had settled into a rhythm. Nathan returned to the stove and filled another bowl for himself. He sat across from her. They ate quietly. The small sounds of spoons against ceramic filled the kitchen. Halfway through the bowl, Melody paused. Her eyes moved toward the living room again, toward the photograph above the fireplace. Nathan noticed. He followed her gaze. "Her name was Claire," he said. Melody didn't look away from the picture. "She your wife?" she asked. "Yes." The word felt steady when he said it. Not easy, but steady. Melody returned her attention to the soup. "What happened?" she asked. Nathan held his spoon for a moment before answering. "Car accident." The room stayed quiet again. Melody nodded once, like that answer fit somewhere in a place she already understood. She finished the bowl. Not a drop left. Nathan stood and reached for it. "You want more?" She hesitated, then nodded. The second bowl disappeared slower. Her shoulders had lowered a little. The tightness in her posture had eased. Warmth did that. Food, too. When she finished, she placed the spoon neatly beside the bowl. Nathan washed the dishes while she watched. "You got somewhere you usually sleep?" he asked after a while. Melody shrugged again. "Sometimes the bus station." Nathan turned slightly toward her. "You alone there?" "Sometimes." And other times she didn't answer. The silence said enough. Nathan dried his hands with a towel. The weight of the situation settled deeper now. This wasn't a kid who had wandered off for the evening. This had been going on for a while. "How long since your grandma got sick?" he asked. Melody's fingers traced the edge of the table. "A while." "Weeks?" She shook her head. "Longer." Nathan exhaled slowly. "And nobody came to check on you?" "No." Her voice stayed matter-of-fact, not angry, not sad. Just stating a fact the way someone might mention the weather. Nathan walked into the living room and grabbed a folded blanket from the couch. When he came back, he handed it to her. "You're staying here tonight," he said. She looked up immediately. He kept his voice calm. "Just tonight. We'll talk to someone tomorrow. Figure things out. Melody held the blanket but didn't unfold it. People take kids away, she said. Nathan crouched slightly so they were closer to eye level. Sometimes they do. Her grip tightened around the blanket. I don't want to go somewhere bad. Nathan didn't answer right away, because he didn't actually know what tomorrow would look like. The system was supposed to help kids like her, but he had seen enough news stories to know it didn't always work the way people hoped. He chose his words carefully. Tonight you're safe here, he said. That was the only promise he could make honestly. Melody studied his face for several seconds, looking for something. Maybe a lie, maybe reassurance. Finally, she nodded once. Nathan stood. I'll show you the spare room. They walked down the short hallway. The spare room had been mostly unused for years. A small bed, a dresser, a lamp on the nightstand. Nathan switched on the light. Melody stepped inside slowly. Her fingers brushed the blanket on the bed. You can sleep here, he said. She walked around the room like she was learning its shape. Then she turned back toward him. You going to lock the door? The question caught him off guard. No, he said. Why? Because you're not trapped here. She seemed to think about that. Then she placed the blanket he gave her on the bed. Nathan stepped back into the hallway. Bathroom's right there, he said, pointing. Towels under the sink. Melody nodded. Nathan started to leave. Then her voice stopped him. Mr. Nathan. He turned. She stood near the edge of the bed. Thank you for the soup. The words sounded unfamiliar in her mouth, but she didn't say them often. Nathan nodded. You're welcome, Melody. He turned off the hallway light and walked back to the living room. The house settled into its usual nighttime quiet. Nathan sat on the couch and rubbed his hands together slowly. His eyes drifted toward the photograph above the fireplace again. Claire's smile stared back at him. For years, he had learned how to live with the silence this house carried, how to keep his routines simple, predictable, safe from anything that might reopen old wounds. Tonight, a small pair of boots sat by the front door. A child slept down the hallway, and Nathan had the uneasy feeling that the quiet life he had built around his grief had just cracked open. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that something new had slipped inside. He leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, a church bell rang softly in the distance. Midnight. Christmas had arrived. Nathan closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easily, because tomorrow he would have to decide whether this night had been an act of kindness, or the beginning of a responsibility he might not be able to walk away from. Nathan woke before the alarm. For a moment he didn't know why. The house felt different, not louder, just occupied. He lay still on the couch, staring at the faint gray light coming through the window. His neck ached from sleeping there. He usually made it to his bed, even on nights when sleep refused to cooperate. Then he heard it. Soft movement down the hallway. Not footsteps exactly. Fabric shifting. A small bump against the wall. Nathan sat up slowly. The clock on the wall read 6012 a.m. He rubbed a hand over his face and listened. Another quiet sound. The spare room door creaked open. Nathan stood and walked down the hallway. Melody stood near the bathroom door. She was fully dressed in the same clothes as last night. Her coat hung loosely around her shoulders. The blanket he gave her was folded over one arm. She froze when she saw him, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Morning, Nathan said. Her eyes moved toward the front door at the end of the hallway, then back to him. You leaving? She asked. Nathan glanced toward the door. No. Her shoulders dropped slightly. I thought maybe you left. He shook his head. I live here. Melody nodded. That made sense to her. He gestured toward the kitchen. You hungry again? She hesitated, then followed him. The house felt colder than the night before. Nathan turned the thermostat up a few degrees while Melody sat in the same chair as yesterday. He opened the fridge. Eggs, bread, milk. Ever had scrambled eggs? He asked. Melody nodded. Grandma made them. Nathan cracked the eggs into a bowl. The quiet rhythm of cooking filled the kitchen again. Butter melted in the pan. The smell spread slowly through the room. Melody rested her elbows on the table and watched. "You sleep okay?" he asked. She shrugged. "The bed's soft." Nathan smiled faintly. "That usually helps." A few minutes later, he placed a plate in front of her. Eggs. Toast. Melody stared at it. Not suspicious this time, just thoughtful. She ate slower than last night. Nathan poured coffee for himself and leaned against the counter. After a while, he said, "We'll need to talk to someone today." Melody stopped chewing. Her eyes lowered. "Do we have to?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. He had spent half the night thinking about that question himself. "Yes," he said eventually. "Why?" "Because kids shouldn't be on their own." She looked up. "I was okay." Nathan met her eyes. "No," he said quietly. "You were surviving." Melody didn't respond. She went back to eating. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve. Nathan slid a napkin across the table. She used that instead. After breakfast, Nathan handed her a clean towel and pointed toward the bathroom again. "There's a toothbrush in the cabinet," he said. Still wrapped. She nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Nathan stood alone in the kitchen for a few minutes. The morning sunlight had begun to reach the window now. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Christmas decorations still hung from porches. Snow covered the lawns in uneven patches. Normal life. Nathan rested both hands on the counter. He knew what the responsible thing was. Call the county office. Report the situation. Let the system do its job. But something about Melody's eyes last night kept returning to him. The quiet acceptance in them. Like she had already learned that adults came and went, and promises rarely lasted. Water shut off in the bathroom. A few seconds later, Melody stepped back into the hallway. Her hair was damp now, combed roughly with her fingers. Nathan nodded toward the living room. "Come here a minute." She followed him. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table. Melody watched it carefully. "Who you calling?" "Social services." Her body stiffened. Nathan noticed. "They're the people who help kids find safe places," he explained. Melody didn't look convinced. Nathan dialed anyway. The phone rang 3 times. A tired voice answered. He explained the situation calmly. "Found a child. Alone. No guardian present." The person on the line asked questions. Age, location, name. Nathan glanced toward Melody while he answered. "She says she's been staying alone for a while." Pause. More typing on the other end. Finally, the voice said someone would come by later that afternoon. Nathan thanked them and ended the call. The room felt quiet again. Melody had not moved. "They coming to take me?" she asked. "They're coming to talk," Nathan said. Her eyes drifted toward the front door again. Nathan recognized the look. Escape planning. He crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over her. "You can stay here until they come," he said. She studied him. "Promise?" Nathan hesitated. The word promise carried weight he hadn't used in years, but he nodded. "Yeah." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. The morning passed slowly. Nathan found an old sweater that fit Melody better than her thin coat. The sleeves were long, but she didn't complain. They sat in the living room for a while. Melody watched television quietly. Cartoons. Nathan noticed she didn't laugh much. But she watched closely, like she was studying how other kids lived. Around noon, Nathan made grilled cheese sandwiches. Melody ate too. After that, she wandered toward the fireplace again. Her eyes stopped on the photograph. "Your baby was in there," she said softly, pointing at Claire's stomach. Nathan stood still. "Yes. Boy or girl? We never found out." Melody nodded slowly. Then she asked something that made Nathan pause. "You still sad?" Nathan looked at the picture, then at the child standing beneath it. "Yes," he said. Melody seemed to accept that. She climbed onto the couch afterward and wrapped herself in the blanket. By early afternoon, the house had grown quiet again. Melody's eyes started closing. She fought it at first. Then sleep won. Nathan covered her with the blanket fully. She barely stirred. He sat in the armchair across the room and watched the slow rise and fall of her breathing. A strange calm settled over the house, but underneath it, Nathan felt something heavier. The clock moved toward 3. At 3:17 p.m., a car pulled into the driveway. Nathan saw it through the window. A gray sedan. He stood slowly. The moment he had been expecting all morning had arrived. Melody shifted slightly on the couch as he walked to the door. Her eyes opened halfway. "You leaving?" she mumbled. Nathan shook his head. "No." He glanced toward the driveway. "Someone's here." Melody sat up immediately. Fear returned to her face so quickly it felt like watching a storm roll in. Nathan opened the door. A woman stepped out of the sedan. Mid-30s. Professional coat. Clipboard in hand. She looked tired but not unkind. Nathan knew, the moment he saw her walking up the path, that whatever happened next, this quiet morning with Melody in his kitchen would not be something he could simply forget. The woman knocked once. Not loudly. Nathan opened the door before she had time to knock again. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked. "Yes." She offered a small nod. "I'm Laura Benton, County Child Services." Her voice carried the tone of someone who had delivered difficult conversations many times before. Calm, careful. Nathan stepped aside so she could come in. Warm air moved past her as she entered the house. She glanced around the living room briefly, her eyes moving in the quick, quiet way professionals often did when they were assessing a place without making it obvious. Her gaze landed on the couch. Melody sat upright now. The blanket had fallen to her lap. Both hands clutched its edge tightly. Laura softened her expression slightly when she saw her. "Hi there," she said gently. Melody didn't answer. She watched Laura the same way she had watched Nathan the night before carefully, measuring something deeper than the words. Laura crouched a little so she wasn't towering over the child. "You must be Melody." A pause. Then a small nod. "My name's Laura," she said. "I talk to kids sometimes when things get confusing." Melody's eyes flicked briefly toward Nathan. He gave a quiet nod back. Laura noticed the exchange. "That okay if I sit?" she asked Melody. Another nod. Laura took the armchair across from the couch. Nathan stayed near the doorway at first, unsure where he belonged in the conversation now. Laura opened her clipboard but didn't look down at it right away. "Mr. Hayes told us he found you near the grocery store last night," she said softly. Melody looked down at the blanket. Laura waited. That was something Nathan noticed about her. She allowed silence to exist. Eventually, Melody said, "I was getting food." Laura nodded slowly. "That must have been really cold." Melody shrugged. Laura glanced toward Nathan briefly. "Would it be all right if Mr. Hayes stepped into the kitchen for a moment while we talk?" Melody's head lifted quickly. Her eyes locked onto Nathan again. The fear in them returned fast. Nathan understood. He spoke gently. "I'll be right there," he said, pointing toward the kitchen only a few steps away. Melody watched him walk there. He stayed within sight. Laura noticed that too. She kept her voice low and calm. "Melody, can you tell me about your grandma?" The question hung in the air. Melody stared at the floor. "She got sick." Laura nodded. "Do you remember when that started?" "A long time." "Was anyone helping her?" Melody shook her head. Laura's pen finally touched the paper. "Did she go to the hospital?" "Yes." "Did she come home after?" Melody hesitated. Then she whispered, "No." The word barely reached across the room. Nathan felt something tighten in his chest. Laura didn't react dramatically. She just asked another question. "Do you remember where you stayed after that?" Melody's fingers twisted the edge of the blanket. "In the apartment." "By yourself?" A small nod. "How long?" Melody shrugged again. "I don't know." Laura wrote something down. Her voice stayed gentle. "Did anyone come to check on you? Teachers? Neighbors?" "No." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. Laura asked a few more quiet questions. About food, about sleeping, about school. The answers were short, simple, but they built a picture slowly, and it was not a good one. After a while, Laura closed the clipboard. She looked toward Nathan. "Mr. Hayes, could I speak with you in the kitchen for a minute?" Nathan stepped forward. Melody's eyes followed him again. Laura noticed. "You can stay right here," she told Melody softly. Nathan and Laura moved into the kitchen. Laura lowered her voice. How long was she alone? Nathan rubbed his forehead. Hard to say. From what she's told me, possibly months. Laura exhaled slowly. That happens more than people realize. Nathan looked toward the living room. She's been sleeping in bus stations. Laura nodded. Her eyes had grown heavier now. Her grandmother passed away 6 months ago. Nathan turned toward her sharply. How do you know that already? We had a record of the hospital admission, Laura said, but no follow-up case was filed. No one reported the child living there. Nathan stared at the floor. 6 months. Laura continued quietly. The apartment building likely assumed relatives took her. Nathan looked back toward the couch. Melody sat perfectly still, waiting. Where does she go now? Nathan asked. Laura hesitated. That hesitation said more than the answer. Temporary placement, she said carefully. Nathan understood what that meant. A foster home. Maybe several. Maybe none that lasted. Laura watched his reaction. You did the right thing calling, she said. Nathan nodded slowly, but the words didn't feel comforting. Will she stay here tonight? He asked. Laura shook her head. I'm required to take her to a certified home. Nathan leaned both hands on the counter. Something in his chest resisted that idea immediately. Laura noticed. You can request to be considered for placement, she added. Nathan looked up. That's a process, though, she said. Background checks, home inspections. Nathan glanced back toward the living room again. Melody was watching them now. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could feel the direction it was going. Laura followed his gaze. She seems to trust you, Laura said quietly. Nathan didn't answer, because he knew trust could break quickly, and a child who had already lost too much. Laura stepped back into the living room. Melody sat straighter immediately. Melody, Laura said softly, we're going to take a little drive together today. Melody's fingers tightened around the blanket. Where? A house where other kids stay for a while. The fear in her face was immediate. Her eyes shot toward Nathan. He felt it like a physical pull. Can he come? She asked. Laura looked at Nathan. Not today. Melody stood up suddenly. The blanket fell to the floor. I don't want to go. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp with panic. Laura stayed calm. I understand. No. Melody shook her head. Her breathing had changed. Quick, uneven. Nathan stepped forward without thinking. He crouched beside her. Hey, he said softly. Melody grabbed the sleeve of his sweater. I don't want to go somewhere bad. The words came out fast, almost desperate. Nathan felt the full weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Laura watched quietly. She had seen this scene many times, but something about this one felt different. Nathan spoke carefully. You remember what I said last night? Melody nodded quickly. You said safe. Nathan looked at Laura, then back at Melody. I'm going to make sure you're safe, he said. Melody studied his face, looking for certainty. Nathan wasn't sure he had it, but he said the words anyway. Okay? He asked. A long pause passed. Then Melody slowly released his sleeve. Laura stepped forward gently. We'll come back and visit, she said. Melody didn't answer. Nathan walked them to the door. Cold air rushed in as it opened. Melody stepped onto the porch. Halfway down the path, she turned around. Her eyes met Nathan's. No words, just a quiet question in them. Nathan stood in the doorway as the car pulled away. The street grew silent again. Snow drifted lightly across the road. Nathan closed the door slowly. The house returned to its old quiet, but it didn't feel the same. The small boots were gone from the doorway. The blanket still lay on the couch. Nathan stared at it for a long time. Then he walked to the kitchen table and sat down. His phone rested in front of him. Laura's words replayed in his mind. You can request to be considered for placement. Nathan hadn't planned on changing his life that morning, but as he sat there in the quiet house, he realized something uncomfortable. The moment Melody stepped into his kitchen last night, the life he thought he had already built had begun shifting under his feet. And the choice waiting in front of him now was not a small one. The house stayed quiet long after the car disappeared. Nathan sat at the kitchen table with his phone in front of him, but he hadn't picked it up yet. The chair across from him was empty again. Yesterday morning, Melody had been sitting there, elbows on the table, watching scrambled eggs cook like it was the most interesting thing she had seen all week. Now there was only the faint ring mark from her water glass. Nathan rubbed his thumb slowly over the edge of the table. The quiet had returned to the house, but it didn't settle the way it used to. It felt hollow. He stood eventually and walked to the living room. The blanket was still on the couch where Melody had dropped it. Nathan folded it slowly. He meant to put it back in the hallway closet. Instead, he left it there. His eyes moved to the photograph above the fireplace again. Claire's smile. The curve of her stomach beneath his hand. For years, that picture had represented the moment before everything collapsed. The life he almost had. Now, strangely, the house no longer felt frozen in that moment. Something had disturbed it. Nathan picked up his phone. He stared at the number Laura Benton had written on the small card she left behind. He didn't dial immediately. Instead, he walked to the kitchen window and looked outside. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Children from down the street ran across a yard pulling a red sled behind them. Their laughter carried faintly through the glass. Nathan felt the weight of time pressing forward. If he did nothing, Melody would move through the system the way so many kids did. Temporary homes. Temporary adults. Temporary safety. He knew enough about the world to understand what often happened next. His thumb hovered over the phone. Then he dialed. Laura answered after 2 rings. "Laura Benton." "It's Nathan Hayes," he said. A short pause. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice sounded a little less formal now. "I figured you might call." Nathan leaned against the counter. "How is she?" Laura exhaled quietly. "She's safe." That answer felt carefully chosen. Nathan understood. "Where is she?" "A temporary foster placement about 15 minutes from you." Nathan nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see him. "She asked about you," Laura added. Nathan closed his eyes briefly. "What did you tell her?" "That you cared enough to call for help." Another silence passed. Nathan spoke again. "You said there was a process." "For placement, yes. I want to start it." Laura didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had shifted slightly. "You understand what that means?" Nathan stared at the kitchen floor. "Explain it." "It means background checks, home inspections, parenting classes, court hearings." Nathan listened. "And if the court approves," she continued, "you could become her foster guardian." Nathan waited. "And after that?" "Possibly adoption," Laura said. "But that takes time." Nathan exhaled slowly. "How long?" "Months," she said. "Maybe longer." Nathan looked around the quiet kitchen. The empty chair. The untouched blanket in the other room. "That's fine," he said. Laura was quiet again. "Mr. Preem, Hayes," she said carefully. "A lot of people feel emotional after situations like this, especially around the holidays." Nathan understood the concern. "You think I'm reacting to the moment?" "I think it's worth making sure this isn't a decision made in grief," she said gently. Nathan rested both hands on the counter. 3 years ago," he said quietly, "my wife and unborn child died in a car accident." Laura didn't interrupt. "I spent the first year barely functioning," Nathan continued. "The second year, learning how to exist again. And the third, pretending that quiet meant healing." Laura listened. Nathan looked toward the hallway. Then he said something that surprised even him. "That house didn't feel alive again until yesterday." Silence held the line for several seconds. Finally, Laura said, "Come to the office tomorrow morning." Nathan straightened slightly. "We'll start the paperwork." Nathan nodded. "Okay." He ended the call. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Then he walked back to the living room and sat on the couch. The blanket still smelled faintly like cold air and soap. Nathan leaned his head back. The decision had been made. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way most real decisions happened. The next morning arrived gray and slow. Nathan dressed early. The county building sat downtown between an old courthouse and a public library. The parking lot was nearly empty when he arrived. Inside, the hallways smelled faintly like coffee and printer ink. Laura met him near the reception desk. She looked less formal today. Hair tied back, sleeves rolled slightly. "Mr. Hayes, Nathan's fine." She nodded. "Come on." They walked into a small office. A stack of papers waited on the desk. Nathan sat down. Laura slid the first form toward him. "Background information," she said. Nathan began filling it out. Name, age, employment, address. The questions continued. Some simple, some heavier. "Have you ever been arrested? Do you have experience caring for children?" Nathan paused briefly at that one. Then he wrote, "I was about to become a father." He continued writing. The process took nearly an hour. Laura occasionally asked follow-up questions about his work, about his home, about his support system. Nathan answered honestly. When they finished, Laura leaned back in her chair. "This is the beginning," she said. Nathan nodded. "When can I see her?" Laura checked a file beside her. "She's adjusting." Nathan waited. "But I think a short visit would be okay this afternoon." Nathan's chest tightened slightly. "Where?" Laura wrote down an address. "A foster home run by a woman named Carol Jensen." Nathan folded the paper carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. As he stood to leave, Laura said something quietly. "You should know something." Nathan turned back. "Kids who have been alone as long as Melody has, they don't trust stability easily." Nathan nodded. "I noticed." Laura met his eyes. "If you're going to step into her life," she said, "you have to stay, even when it gets difficult." Nathan thought about the small girl in the alley holding an orange. "I know," he said. He walked out of the building a few minutes later. The cold air outside felt sharper than it had yesterday. Nathan climbed into his truck and started the engine. For years his life had moved in careful, quiet circles. Work, home, memory. Now the road ahead of him had changed direction, and somewhere across town, a 7-year-old girl who had spent 6 months learning not to depend on anyone was waiting in a house that did not belong to her. Nathan pulled onto the road. For the first time in years, he wasn't driving toward the past. The address Laura gave him led to a quiet street on the edge of town. Small houses, older trees, lawns covered in thin winter snow. Nathan slowed the truck as he approached the number written on the paper. A pale blue house with white shutters. Nothing unusual about it. A plastic snowman stood near the porch steps, leaning slightly to one side. Nathan turned off the engine but stayed in the truck for a moment. The heater hummed quietly as it cooled. He realized his hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. He loosened them slowly. Then he stepped out. The cold air stung his face. Nathan walked up the short path and knocked. The door opened after a few seconds. A woman in her early 60s stood there. Soft gray hair. Comfortable sweater. "You must be Nathan," she said. Her voice carried the warm tone of someone used to welcoming nervous people. "Yes, I'm Carol." She stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled faintly like cinnamon and laundry detergent. It was the kind of smell that made a place feel lived in. Children's drawings covered part of the refrigerator in the kitchen. A pair of small shoes rested near the entry rug. Nathan noticed everything. He had learned long ago that environments spoke quietly if you paid attention. Carol led him toward the living room. "She's in the back room," Carol said softly. She didn't say much when she arrived. Nathan felt that familiar weight settle in his chest again. Carol stopped near a doorway. "You can go in." Nathan stepped forward slowly. The room was small. A couch, a coffee table, a few toys in a basket near the wall. Melody sat on the floor beside the window. Her back faced the door. She was holding a small puzzle piece in one hand. Nathan recognized her immediately, even from behind. Something about the way she sat. Still, contained. He knocked lightly against the doorframe. Melody turned. For a moment she just stared at him, like her brain needed time to accept what her eyes were seeing. Then she stood up. Not quickly, carefully. "You came," she said. Nathan nodded. "I said I would." She walked closer but stopped halfway across the room. Her eyes searched his face again. Not for fear this time. for confirmation. "You staying?" she asked. Nathan crouched down slightly so they were closer in height. "I'm trying," he said. The answer seemed to confuse her. "You're trying?" Nathan took a slow breath. "I have to go through some steps first." Melody tilted her head slightly. "What kind of steps?" "Paperwork," he said. Her brow tightened. "Like school papers? Something like that." Melody looked down at the floor for a moment. Then she said quietly, "They said I might go somewhere else soon." Nathan had expected that. Still, hearing it made something twist in his chest. "They're still figuring things out," he said. Melody shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "Is it bad here?" Nathan glanced around the room. "No." Melody followed his gaze. "Then why can't I just stay with you?" The question landed simply. No anger, just confusion. Nathan chose his words carefully, because adults have rules about where kids are allowed to live. Melody frowned slightly. "That's dumb." Nathan almost smiled. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Sometimes it is." Melody looked at the puzzle piece still in her hand. Then she walked back to the floor and sat down again. Nathan sat across from her. "What's the puzzle supposed to be?" he asked. She turned the box around. The picture of a lighthouse. Melody placed the piece into the corner slowly. "Grandma liked the ocean," she said. Nathan nodded. "Have you ever seen the ocean?" She shook her head. "No." Nathan remembered the first time he saw it as a kid. The sound of the waves, the endless horizon. Maybe one day he stopped the thought before it ran too far ahead. Melody spoke again. "The lady here is nice." Nathan glanced toward the hallway. Carol was somewhere in the kitchen. "That's good," he said. Melody nodded. "But she's not you." The sentence hung quietly between them. Nathan didn't answer immediately, because there was no easy reply to something like that. Instead, he reached for another puzzle piece. They worked on the lighthouse together for a while. No hurry, just small movements, finding edges, fitting shapes. After a few minutes, Melody said, "Did you eat today?" Nathan blinked. "Yes," she nodded thoughtfully. "Good." The seriousness in her tone made him pause. "Why?" "Grandma said people forget to eat when they're sad." Nathan looked at her carefully. "I'm okay," he said. Melody placed another piece in the puzzle. "You still sad, though?" Nathan didn't argue. "No," he said quietly. "I still am." She seemed satisfied with the honesty. They worked in silence again. After a while, Carol appeared in the doorway. "I'm going to make hot chocolate," she said. Melody looked up. Nathan noticed the faintest spark in her eyes. Carol smiled. "You want some?" Melody nodded. Nathan did too. A few minutes later, the three of them sat at the small kitchen table. Steam curled up from the mugs. Melody wrapped both hands around hers. Nathan noticed she didn't drink it right away, just warmed her fingers first. Carol watched the two of them quietly. "You know," she said gently, "I've been doing this a long time." Nathan looked at her. "Kids can tell when someone means to stay." Nathan held her gaze. "I do." Carol nodded. "I figured." Melody sipped the hot chocolate slowly. Then she looked up at Nathan again. "You coming back tomorrow?" Nathan answered without hesitation. "Yes." Melody accepted that. The visit lasted another hour. When it was time for Nathan to leave, Melody walked him to the door. She didn't grab his sleeve this time. She didn't panic. She just stood there quietly. "Bye," she said. Nathan knelt slightly. "See you tomorrow?" She nodded. Then she turned and walked back toward the living room. Nathan stepped outside. The cold air hit his face again, but something felt different this time. The road ahead still held paperwork, courtrooms, decisions made by people behind desks. But the small girl inside that house had already begun adjusting her world around the idea that he might return. Nathan walked back to his truck, and for the first time since this all began, he understood the real weight of the promise he had started making. Not with words, but with every step he took back through that door. The next few weeks did not move quickly. Nathan learned that almost immediately. Paperwork had its own pace. Slow, careful, unmoved by urgency. But his routine began changing anyway. Every afternoon after work, he drove to Carol Jensen's house. Some days Melody was already sitting near the window when he arrived, like she had been listening for the sound of his truck. Other days Carol would call her from another room. Melody never ran to the door. She simply appeared. Quiet, observant. But Nathan noticed something else. She always checked to see if he had actually come alone. It took him a few visits to understand why. Children who had been moved from place to place often expected surprises. New adults, new rules, new endings. Nathan always arrived the same way. Same truck, same quiet knock, same small nod when the door opened. Consistency mattered more than words. One afternoon near the end of January, Carol handed Nathan a folder when he arrived. "Laura stopped by earlier," she said. Nathan opened it. Inside were forms, schedules, dates, parenting classes, Carol explained. Nathan exhaled softly. "That fast?" Carol smiled. "The system moves slowly, until it doesn't." Nathan flipped through the pages. Evening classes twice a week, home inspection scheduled, background interviews. He nodded. "All right." Carol watched him carefully. "You still sure about this?" Nathan closed the folder. "Yes." Carol seemed satisfied with that. Melody appeared a moment later in the hallway. She had a book tucked under one arm. Nathan noticed immediately. "You reading now?" Melody shrugged. "Carol said books help when you're bored." Nathan glanced at the cover. "The Secret Garden. That's a good one." Melody nodded like she already knew. They sat in the living room together. Melody read a few pages out loud. Her voice stumbled occasionally over longer words, but she pushed through them. Nathan didn't correct her unless she asked. After a while, she closed the book. "You have books at your house? Quite a few." She looked thoughtful. "Do kids read them?" Nathan hesitated. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." Melody seemed to think about that. Then she nodded once. Later that evening, Nathan drove home with the folder sitting on the passenger seat beside him. The house looked the same as always when he unlocked the door, but something had changed in the way he moved through it. He walked into the spare room. For years it had been little more than a storage space. Now he stood in the doorway imagining small adjustments. Different sheets, a lamp that wasn't so harsh, maybe shelves for books. Nathan leaned against the doorframe. It felt strange planning a future inside rooms that had been frozen in memory for so long. He turned off the light and stepped back into the hallway. Claire's photograph waited above the fireplace like it always had. Nathan paused there. For years that picture had felt like a quiet boundary, a line between the life he had before and the quiet existence he had built afterward. Now he found himself speaking out loud to it. "I hope you'd understand," he said softly. The room didn't answer, but the silence didn't feel as heavy as it once had. The parenting classes began the following week. Nathan sat in a small room at the community center with 8 other adults. Some couples, some individuals. A social worker named Daniel led the sessions. The conversations were practical. Child development, trauma responses, attachment patterns. Nathan listened carefully. Some things he expected. Others surprised him. One evening, Daniel said something that stayed with him. "Kids who have lived through instability test adults in quiet ways," he explained. "They might push boundaries, withdraw, or wait for you to disappear." Nathan thought about Melody sitting by the window each afternoon, waiting. Daniel continued, "They're not trying to cause problems. They're trying to answer one question." Nathan leaned forward slightly. "What question?" he asked. Daniel looked around the room. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" The words stayed with Nathan all the way home. February arrived slowly. Snow fell twice that month. Melody began visiting Nathan's house on supervised afternoons. Laura usually stayed nearby in the living room while they spent time in the kitchen. The first time Melody stepped back inside the house, she stopped near the doorway again. Her eyes moved across the room the same way they had that first night. Nathan noticed something different, though. She didn't look afraid this time, just careful. You remember where the kitchen is, Nathan said. Melody nodded. Soup room. Nathan smiled. Fair enough. They cooked together that day. Nothing complicated, just grilled cheese and tomato soup. Melody stood on a chair to reach the counter. Nathan showed her how to butter the bread. She took the job seriously. Laura watched quietly from the table. After lunch, Melody wandered into the living room. Nathan followed. Her eyes stopped on the photograph again. This time she studied it longer. You miss them every day, she asked. Nathan didn't pretend otherwise. Yes. Melody nodded slowly. Then she said something that made Nathan pause. My grandma used to say missing people means they mattered. Nathan felt his throat tighten slightly. She sounds like a wise woman. Melody gave a small shrug. She liked puzzles too. Nathan looked at the puzzle box still sitting on the shelf where Melody had left it weeks ago. We should finish that lighthouse sometime, he said. Melody's eyes brightened slightly. Yeah. The home inspection came in mid-February. A woman from the county walked through every room carefully. Smoke detectors, locks, cleanliness. Nathan followed behind her, answering questions. When she finished, she nodded. Everything looks good. Nathan felt a quiet wave of relief. But Laura had warned him. Approval didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces, paper by paper, week by week. One evening near the end of the month, Melody sat on the couch in Nathan's living room during another supervised visit. She had brought the secret garden again. Halfway through reading, she stopped suddenly. Nathan looked up from the paperwork he had been reviewing. What's wrong? Melody stared at the page. What if the garden stayed locked forever? She asked. Nathan leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? Melody traced a finger across the illustration on the page, like if nobody found the key. Nathan thought about the question. Then he said carefully, sometimes keys take a while to find. Melody looked at him. But someone still looks for them? Nathan nodded. Yes. Melody seemed satisfied with that. She went back to reading. Nathan watched her quietly for a while. Then he looked toward the photograph above the fireplace. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt like a place where time had stopped. It felt like something was slowly opening again. Not quickly, not easily, but steadily. And Nathan was beginning to understand that learning how to stay was harder than learning how to leave. March arrived quietly. Snow began thinning along the sidewalks. Small patches of grass pushed through in the yards. Nathan noticed the change one morning while scraping ice from his windshield. Winter had started loosening its grip. The process with the county was moving, too. Not fast, but forward. Laura called every few days with updates. Background checks cleared, home inspection the brewed, parenting classes nearly finished. Each piece felt small on its own, but together they formed something solid, a path. Nathan kept visiting Melody at Carol's house 3 or 4 afternoons a week, sometimes longer when Carol didn't mind. Their time together settled into routines. Melody liked routines. Nathan could see it in the way her shoulders relaxed when things happened the same way twice. He knocked. Carol opened the door. Melody appeared in the hallway. Small nod. Then the two of them moved to the kitchen or living room. The consistency mattered. It answered a question Melody rarely asked out loud. One afternoon they worked on the lighthouse puzzle again. Only a few pieces remained. Melody studied the last section carefully. Nathan watched from the couch. You always do the edges first, she said. That's how my grandma taught me. Nathan nodded. My dad used to say the edges make the middle easier. Melody slid one piece into place. The image of the lighthouse grew clearer. She leaned back slightly. Did your dad live in your house too? Nathan shook his head. No, different state. Melody looked thoughtful. Do you see him? Not as often as I should. Melody seemed to file that away. Children had a quiet way of collecting information about adults, not to judge, just to understand how the world worked. She placed another puzzle piece carefully. Only one remained. Nathan picked it up and handed it to her. Melody studied it for a moment before pressing it into the final gap. The lighthouse stood complete. She smiled, not wide, but real. Nathan noticed. They sat quietly looking at the finished puzzle. "Grandma would like this one," Melody said. Nathan nodded. "I think she would." Melody ran a finger lightly across the surface of the puzzle. Then she said something softly. "I wish she could see it." Nathan felt the weight of that sentence. "Me too," he said. They stayed quiet for a moment longer. Then Melody stood and carried the puzzle box back to the shelf. Nathan watched her move through the house more comfortably now. Not like a visitor, more like someone learning the shape of a place they might belong. 2 weeks later, Laura called again. Her voice sounded lighter than usual. "Nathan, the review board approved the placement." Nathan stopped pacing in the living room. "Meaning?" "Meaning Melody can move in with you under foster guardianship." Nathan felt the words settle slowly. "When?" "If you're ready. This weekend." Nathan looked around the house. The spare room had changed over the last few weeks. New sheets, a small bookshelf, a lamp with softer light, even a few puzzles stacked neatly in the corner. "I'm ready," he said. Laura paused. "Then Saturday." Nathan thanked her and hung up. For several minutes he simply stood in the middle of the room. The house felt different again. Not empty. Not quiet. Waiting. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies. Nathan drove to Carol's house earlier than usual. The same blue shutters. The same leaning snowman on the lawn. But today the visit felt different. Permanent. Carol opened the door with a warm smile. "Big day." Nathan nodded. "Yeah." Melody appeared in the hallway behind her. She carried a small backpack. That was all. Nathan looked at it. "That everything?" Melody nodded. Carol rested a hand on Melody's shoulder. "You ready?" Melody looked at Nathan, then back at Carol. "I think so." Carol knelt beside her. "You remember what we talked about?" Melody nodded again. "People can stay." Carol smiled. "That's right." Melody hugged her briefly. Then she walked toward Nathan. Nathan held the door open. The cold air outside carried the faint smell of melting snow. They walked to the truck together. Melody climbed into the passenger seat like she had the first night. Nathan started the engine. Neither of them spoke right away. As the truck pulled away from Carol's house, Melody looked out the window. The streets passed slowly. Nathan kept his hand steady on the wheel. After a few minutes, Melody asked quietly, "Am I allowed to stay now?" Nathan glanced at her. "Yes." She nodded. Then she asked another question. "For real?" Nathan smiled slightly. "For real." Melody leaned back into the seat. Her shoulders relaxed in a way Nathan hadn't seen before. They drove the rest of the way mostly in silence. But it wasn't the heavy silence from before. This one felt calmer. When they reached Nathan's street, Melody recognized it immediately. "The soup house," she said. Nathan laughed softly. "Yeah." He barked in the driveway. Melody stepped out and looked at the house carefully. Not with suspicion this time, with curiosity. Nathan unlocked the door. Melody walked inside slowly. The same living room. The same couch. The same photograph above the fireplace. But something had changed. The house didn't feel like a temporary stop anymore. Melody set her backpack near the hallway. Then she turned to Nathan. "What do we do now?" Nathan thought about the question. For years he had lived in quiet routines built around absence. Now those routines had space for something new. "First," he said, "we eat lunch." Melody nodded approvingly. "Good plan." Nathan walked into the kitchen. Melody followed. She climbed onto the same chair she had used the first morning. Nathan opened the fridge. "Soup again?" he asked. Melody smiled. "Yeah." Nathan started the pot on the stove. The familiar smell filled the kitchen once more. Melody rested her chin on her hands while she watched. Outside the window, the last patches of snow were melting into the grass. Inside the house, the quiet had changed. It no longer felt like something heavy pressing down. It felt like space. Room for voices. Room for footsteps. Room for the slow process of building something neither of them had expected when that night in the alley began. And Nathan understood something clearly now. Staying didn't mean the past disappeared. It meant choosing, every day, to build something beside it. Spring came slowly that year. Nathan noticed it first in the mornings. Light arrived earlier through the kitchen window. The cold air softened. Birds started returning to the trees along the street. Small changes. But inside the house, the changes were larger. Melody's backpack began appearing in different places, sometimes beside the couch, sometimes near the kitchen table. Once Nathan found it in the hallway with a half-finished drawing sticking out of the zipper. The house was no longer quiet in the same way. Footsteps moved through it now. Small ones. The first few weeks of Melody living with him felt careful, not tense, just deliberate. Both of them were learning how the other existed. Melody woke early most mornings. Nathan discovered that the first time he walked into the kitchen and found her already sitting at the table, feet swinging slightly above the floor. "You up long?" he asked. She shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." Nathan started the coffee machine. "You can wake me next time." Melody shook her head quickly. "No. Why not?" She hesitated. "People get mad when you wake them." Nathan looked at her for a moment. "I won't." Melody didn't answer. But the next morning she stayed in bed a little longer. That counted as progress. School began again 2 weeks after she moved in. Laura had helped arrange it. Nathan walked Melody to the front doors on the first day. Children rushed past them carrying backpacks and lunchboxes. Melody stood very still beside him. Her hand tightened around the strap of her bag. "You don't have to like the first day," Nathan said quietly. Melody nodded. "But you'll be here after?" "Yes." "Promise?" Nathan paused. That word still carried weight. "Yes," he said. Melody studied his face for a second. Then she turned and walked inside the building. Nathan stayed there longer than necessary, watching the doors. Only when the bell rang did he finally head back to his truck. The evenings slowly formed their own rhythm. Homework at the kitchen table. Simple dinners. Reading time on the couch. Melody finished The Secret Garden one night and closed the book carefully. "That garden had a key," she said. Nathan nodded. "Sometimes it takes a while to find." Melody looked around the room thoughtfully. "I think this house had one too." Nathan didn't answer immediately. But he understood what she meant. The court hearing came in early summer. Lara met them outside the courthouse steps that morning. Melody wore a small blue dress Carol had helped pick out. Nathan wore the same dark jacket he hadn't touched in years. The building inside smelled faintly like old paper and polished wood. Melody stayed close beside him while they waited in the hallway. "You nervous?" Nathan asked. She nodded. "Yeah." Nathan understood that feeling. When the courtroom doors opened, Laura gave them a small nod. "Ready." They walked inside together. The hearing itself was quiet, shorter than Nathan expected. The judge reviewed the case file carefully, asked a few questions. Look over the paperwork Nathan had spent months completing. Finally, she looked down at Melody. "Do you feel safe living with Mr. Hayes?" Melody nodded. "Yes." The judge's expression softened slightly. "And do you want to stay there?" Melody looked up at Nathan briefly. Then she turned back to the judge. "Yes." The judge signed the final document. Nathan heard the faint scratch of the pen against paper. A small sound. But it carried weight. She looked up again. "Congratulations, Mr. Hayes." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Thank you." Melody tilted her head. "That means I stay?" Nathan nodded. "That means you stay." Melody seemed to think about that for a moment. Then she smiled. This one was bigger than the first puzzle smile. Laura wiped at her eye quietly beside them. Life continued after that. Because real life always did. There were school days, doctor appointments, parent-teacher meetings. Nathan never imagined himself attending. Melody adjusted slowly. Some nights she still woke up from bad dreams. Nathan would hear the bedroom door open quietly, small footsteps in the hallway. He would walk her back to bed and sit there until she fell asleep again. No speeches, just presence. Over time, those nights became less frequent. Trust worked that way, slow, steady, built in quiet moments. Months passed, summer faded, autumn arrived with cool air and falling leaves. Then winter returned again. Nathan didn't realize how much time had moved forward until he noticed something one evening while driving home. Christmas lights were appearing on houses again, the same decorations from the year before, the same music drifting through store speakers. But this year felt different. Not heavy, not empty, just full. When Nathan pulled into the driveway, he saw Melody through the living room window. She sat at the table drawing something carefully. Nathan stepped inside. "What are you working on?" he asked. Melody held up the paper. "A lighthouse." Nathan smiled. "Looks familiar." She nodded. "It's for the tree." Nathan blinked. "The tree." Melody pointed toward the corner of the living room. A small artificial Christmas tree stood there. Nathan hadn't noticed when she and Laura set it up earlier that afternoon. "You forgot it was almost Christmas," Melody said. Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. "I guess I did." Melody taped the drawing carefully to one of the branches. Then she stepped back to look at it. Nathan watched quietly. For years, Christmas had been something he passed through carefully, a season full of memories he tried not to disturb. But now the house looked different. Lights, ornaments, a small drawing of a lighthouse hanging near the middle. Melody stood beside him. "This one's better," she said. Nathan looked down. "Better than what?" "Last year." Nathan thought about the alley, the cold, the sound of a small voice saying, "I was getting food." He nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "It is." Snow started falling again a few days before Christmas. Not the heavy kind, just quiet flakes drifting down through the street lights in the evening. Nathan noticed it first when he stepped outside to take the trash out. The air had that still feeling winter carried when it planned to stay a while. Through the living room window, he could see Melody sitting on the floor near the tree. The small lighthouse drawing still hung from one of the branches. Nathan stood on the porch for a moment before going back inside. The house felt warmer than it used to in winter. Not because of the heater, because it wasn't empty anymore. Melody had developed a habit over the last few months. Every night before bed, she checked the front door. Not the lock, just the door itself. Nathan noticed it the first time by accident. She would walk over quietly, touch the handle once, then head down the hallway. At first he thought she was making sure it was locked. But one evening he asked, "Why do you do that?" Melody looked at the door like she had never thought about it before. "Just making sure it's still there." Nathan didn't laugh. He understood. For a long time in her life, doors had meant leaving. Now she was checking that this one stayed. School closed for the holidays the week before Christmas. Melody spent most of that time drawing at the kitchen table or reading on the couch. Nathan worked from home a few days, answering emails while she colored quietly nearby. Sometimes she asked questions. Not big ones, just small things children wondered about. "Did you like snow when you were a kid?" "Yes." "Did Claire like Christmas?" Nathan paused before answering. "Yes." Melody nodded thoughtfully. "What about the baby?" Nathan leaned back in his chair. "We didn't get that far." Melody seemed to understand that answer. She didn't ask anything else. On Christmas Eve, the house felt peaceful. Nathan made soup in the kitchen again. The same chicken noodle he had made the night Melody first arrived. The smell filled the room. Melody sat at the table, swinging her legs slightly. "You make this a lot," she said. Nathan smiled faintly. "It works." Melody watched the steam rising from the pot. Grandma used to say, "Soup fixes things." Nathan thought about that. Sometimes it does. They ate quietly, the same way they had that first night. But the silence between them felt different now. Comfortable. After dinner, Melody helped wash the dishes. Water splashed onto the counter while she tried to rinse a bowl that was a little too big for her hands. Nathan dried it beside her. "You're getting better at that," he said. Melody shrugged. "I practice." When the kitchen was clean, they moved to the living room. The small Christmas tree glowed softly. Melody sat cross-legged on the floor looking at the lighthouse drawing. Nathan settled onto the couch behind her. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." Melody turned slightly. "Why did you stop that night?" Nathan knew exactly what she meant. The alley. The dumpster. The orange. He took a moment before answering. "I almost didn't." Melody waited. Nathan rubbed his hands together slowly. "I was used to walking past things," he said. "Past what?" "Past memories." Past people. Past life, I guess. Melody considered that. But you didn't walk past me. Nathan looked at the small Christmas tree. Then he looked at the child sitting on the floor of his living room. No, he said quietly. I didn't. Melody leaned back slightly against the couch. After a moment, she said something very softly. I'm glad you didn't. Nathan felt that familiar tightness in his chest. Not pain, something deeper, something that had been missing for a long time. Later that night, Melody fell asleep on the couch. The tree lights reflected softly across the room. Nathan covered her with the same blanket from that first night. The fabric had been washed dozens of times since then, but he still remembered the moment she first held it. Cold fingers, careful eyes, a child who had already learned not to expect warmth. Nathan sat in the armchair and watched the slow rise and fall of her breathing. Outside, snow continued falling. The church bell down the street rang quietly at midnight. Christmas had arrived again. But this time, the house didn't feel like a place filled with echoes. It felt like something alive. The next morning, Melody woke early. Nathan found her standing by the front door again. She touched the handle once. Then she turned toward him. "Merry Christmas," she said. Nathan smiled. "Merry Christmas, Melody." She walked into the living room and looked at the small tree. The lighthouse drawing still hung in the center. Melody pointed at it. "You know what I think now?" "What?" "I think that lighthouse means something." Nathan leaned against the doorway. "What do you think it means?" Melody thought for a moment. "It helps people find their way." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's usually what they're for." Melody looked around the room. Then she said something simple. "Good thing you stopped in that alley." Nathan didn't answer right away, because he understood something now that had taken months to become clear. He hadn't saved Melody that night, not the way people sometimes imagine rescue stories. What had really happened was quieter than that. Two people who had both lost something important had crossed paths in a cold alley. One of them needed help. The other needed a reason to open his life again. Nathan stepped forward and adjusted one of the branches on the tree. The lighthouse drawing swayed gently with the movement. Melody watched it carefully. Then she said the last thing Nathan expected to hear that morning. "Hey, Dad?" Nathan froze for a second. Melody didn't seem to notice. She was still looking at the tree. Nathan cleared his throat softly. "Yes?" Melody pointed at the kitchen. "Can we make more soup later?" Nathan laughed quietly. "Yeah," he said, "we can do that." And for the first time in years, the word later didn't feel like something uncertain. It felt like something they both had. Together,